Welcome to the Working Well podcast. I'm Tim Boris, CEO of Fresh Wellness Group. This show explores the diverse aspects of workplace health and personal performance. On the Working Well podcast, we dive into the foundations of what makes wellness work in workplaces around the world. We connect with corporate leaders, executives, and industry experts who are helping make life more awesome at work and home. Join us to learn workplace wellness best practices, personal performance tips, and access resources to jumpstart your personal and corporate programs. Charmaine Hammond is a professional speaker and author on resilience and collaboration, and now she's also the executive producer of the Back Home Again film. She lived in Fort McMurray for 15 years and had the opportunity to work on resilience and recovery activities with organizations and school divisions following the Fort McMurray wildfires. Charmaine is an expert on conflict resolution, resilience, positive mental health, and team collaboration. Charmaine helps teams communicate effectively, build trust, and work better together. Michael Mankowski was born and raised in Fort McMurray, Wood Buffalo. He is owner and operator of Alien Cow, formerly known as Wood Buffalo Productions, an award-winning production house based in Alberta, Canada. Michael is a graduate of the University of Lethbridge, Bachelor of Management, and Vancouver Film School 3D and Animation program. Charmaine, Michael, thank you so much for joining me on the Working Well podcast. I'm excited to have you here. This is really awesome. Charmaine, we haven't caught up in a long time, and Michael, first time meeting you, so I'm looking forward to hearing about this exciting project that you have on the go. Tell me about this film. It's being released in the fall, is that correct?
Yeah, thanks, Tim, for having us on. It is released in the fall. We've been working on this for 5 years, so we're very excited to kind of put this out in the world. And we've submitted to 30 film festivals, so we're still waiting to hear back on which ones we're going to be premiering at, but we're very excited.
Excellent. So 5 years in the making. This is a big project, and it's a bit of a labor of love. Tell me where it started from and how it came to.
Prior to the wildfire, I was running a video production company in Fort McMurray, where I was born and raised. And I just, won Best Short Film at the Alberta Film and Television Awards, and was kind of gearing up to do my first big feature film. And ultimately that was taken away, and I was evacuated like everyone else. I was actually on the line getting ready to, prep that movie, and was evacuated from my community. And after that, I was given the opportunity to work with the Red Cross and be one of the first to come into the community and film testimonials of people that were affected by the wildfire. And I recorded over 200 testimonials during that time, as well as the 1 year, 2 year anniversary, and 2 documentaries for advice. And I would have done the majority of the community videos around the 2016 wildfire. And that's, shortly after that, I met Charmaine and had the opportunity to pitch for this project, and we've been working on it ever since.
Very cool. 200 testimonials. That's a lot of footage to go through as well.
Yeah, it was a very interesting process because I would film a lot of these videos, sometimes even for other companies. And I found when I did like a little documentary or a video here and there, sometimes it wasn't an accurate representation of our community. So I had a lot of powerful untold stories. So I wanted to take those and tell them from the perspective of animals and what it was like to go through and be evacuated, to be separated from your home, and eventually come back and rebuild.
And so tell me a bit about some of the testimonials that you heard. Obviously, it was a massive fire and traumatic experience for everyone involved, but what types of really interesting and unique stories did you hear?
I got to hear everything from, the mayor, head of Red Cross, all the firefighters, teachers, Indigenous leaders, fur traders, and kind of everyone in between, just families that were affected. It ranged from, you could talk to a family and a child would tell you about all things lost in his bedroom, or you go to a school and you talk to a teacher and she's devastated because she's gutting the classroom, throwing out all the kids' stuff. She can't give it back, throwing out all the, the memorabilia, the mascot, all the awards. So the sense of normalcy and, all the things that we remember, it's gone. And, or, I talked to an Indigenous fur trader, and even if we rebuild his home, his way of life is gone because he can't get the animals to come back. So it was, it's very powerful. And actually through that experience, I ended up healing. I was struggling a lot of myself. I was affected heavily by the wildfire. And I really felt this was kind of like I noticed that I started healing through this process, and I wanted to create something, as a way to have a conversation around mental health.
And yeah, that's of course massive mental health challenge. And what lessons did you come out of that with, or what healing process did you and the whole community go through? I know like there were a lot of people out there that watched that from a distance on news and you see the news clips, but to really be there and experience it,
Yeah,
obviously very different.
I think it brought us together. It was just everyone in the community had a shared experience. And I think we're all closer because of it, where everyone's like now a neighbor with one another. So I really felt even the people that were extremely affected, like, and so much actually, not even just our community, but across Canada. Like, I just remember the simple thing of like, I'm evacuated, I'm in Edmonton, and, just can't even describe all the things that are going through my head. And like someone comes over and buys me a beer, and that simple gesture of like how much that meant to me at that time. And there's everyone who has that story in our community of like someone who gave them gas or someone who let them stay in a condo for a bit. Like it really was, help across the country. And yeah, so I think it just was that shared experience that brought us together.
Yeah. And Charmaine, how did you and Michael meet, and how did you start to collaborate?
This is one of my favorite stories to tell. I actually lived in Fort McMurray for about 15 years, not at the time of the wildfires, but I was actually called back by some of the social profit organizations and the school divisions to work with the community and organizations in their resilience and recovery process. And while I was there working with some clients, I was introduced to Michael. And at that time, this film was much shorter. It was about a 10-minute film. And when he shared his concept and his vision, or what I would call his big dream, I knew in that moment I was a heck yes. This project just spoke to me on so many levels. I loved the way that Michael talked about his vision of collaborating for this to be a community film. I get emotional when I talk about it, but Michael calls this his love letter to the community. And that's what he portrayed to me 5 years ago. But then there was the other part that was really important was the mental health component, and that Michael saw this project this film as one that could actually inspire people to talk about mental health, not only about mental health related to a forest fire, but mental health related to our everyday living, mental health in the workplace. And it's a topic. I've worked in the mental health field for many, many years, and those are tough conversations for many people to have. So that's how I met Michael. I also know Michael's mom and have worked with his mom on projects, and I didn't even make those connections when I first met Michael. So the story is really, it's been 5 years of working on this project, and it's changed and evolved, but it's one that I think will really help a lot of people have important conversations.
Well, makes perfect sense now that you see it was a heck yes, because your professional background, mental health, resilience, collaboration with teams, and that's exactly what the community was going through. So I'd love to hear more of your perspective on some of the nuggets of wisdom that came out of that, and the lessons that we can pull into this pandemic we're going through now.
I wanted to echo what Michael said earlier about how people came together. And so I didn't experience the fire. I wasn't living there at the time, but I was one of those people in a community that I watched my own community do things in support of Fort McMurray wood buffalo. So for example, I went walking with the dog one day, and there was these messages of love on the sidewalk by children with sidewalk chalk and paint, just sending good wishes to the Fort McMurray wood buffalo region and residents. And so I saw how tough times, crisis, disaster, forest fires can actually bring people together. And Michael had that shared experience living in Fort McMurray at the time. And, I was one of these external people that also witnessed it. The other piece that, is really interesting from our partners with Canadian Mental Health Association and Canadian Red Cross, learning their perspective. And both of them have talked about how recovering after a disaster is really a journey. It is a long process for recovery. And I know, Michael, you probably see that even just doing all the interviews and then having to watch as you're producing the film, you're watching this over and over again. So it really is a process as we recover from crisis in our life.
And yeah, I think does that process ever end?
No, I think it's it's something you have to work on, ultimately, especially in our community, they're affected by ultimately the economy, then the wildfire, then the floods, and then, COVID recently. So, and I think a lot of us have that shared experience now with COVID of trauma. And when we started this, we couldn't even say the word mental health out loud. It was, we talked about the PTSD, the effects of after the wildfire. Mental health was, I feel like, a taboo, where I feel like in the last couple of years, we see that change. Now, you have celebrities endorsing it, companies, and it's okay to talk about your mental health publicly. And that's that's the opportunity we have is I think me and Charmaine just hope that this can be the conversation starter to talk about mental health in a healthier way. And hopefully, build these support resources as well, discussion guides and an app, with the movie to help. But I think we have this great opportunity to have that discussion now.
When I'd say Fort McMurray, for at least from my perspective, is, in a lot of the larger centers, maybe, and 5 years ago, it was probably is different with the pandemic. Mental health is much more talked about, but particularly in the larger centers, as you get to more rural and the oil sands and oil and gas mentality, that wasn't as much talked about. We think of Fort McMurray as this, sort of rough and tumble town. And obviously it's grown tremendously over the years, but it still has that, the roughneck image, right?
Very much so. Yeah.
And that's, mental health in those types of communities is not as talked about, or at least that's my perspective from that. Has that changed?
Well, part of that, honestly, is I hope to change a little bit of that perspective. And, Fort McMurray often is, as you said, painted with that brush, and I'm not going to disagree with that at all. But I do think there's another side of Fort McMurray too, the community side. And that's kind of what I try and focus on. This is just, the community and coming back as a community. And I hope that then we can use this for other communities that are affected by disasters and continue that conversation, whether it be in the workplace or, the schools, or just, with the family member. I think it's just, by watching the movie, I hope we can finally have that conversation, of healthy conversation, because many people today are still struggling in my community. Some haven't rebuilt, and some people don't want to talk about it. We just had the 5-year anniversary of the fire, so it's an emotional time for a lot. But ultimately, Charmaine kind of always said too to me, it's like, you don't have to watch this, but we have to, if we showing that people are still hurting also shows there's a need for this, and we want to create this and put this out there so we can have that conversation.
Yeah.
Tim, you mentioned something a minute ago that I think is really important to come back to when you were talking about, the world is going through the pandemic right now, and now we're seeing mental health being something that is a topic we can speak to. We're seeing it on the news. We see it, in our conversations with people. And Michael, you talked about that shared experience of Fort McMurray. So I think that with what everyone is going through right now, it is a topic that we can actually embrace. And when you look at the mental health statistics and the research that's being done right now, mental health concerns are very, very high and prevalent and need attention. And that's one of the reasons, Michael, I think you chose animation as the medium to do this film, because I've heard you talk about it, where you said that animation kind of softens the impact of what people are watching. So that was a strategic on your part.
Yeah, ultimately I was originally approached to create a documentary for, children struggling with PTSD symptoms, and also to use that maybe as a conversation to talk to teachers and parents and point them to resources, because a lot of people were sick of the Fort McMurray Strong and a lot of branding that was coming out. And, I thought a documentary was too heavy, for a lot of that. So I thought it was a great way to take those and stories and infuse them from the perspective of animals.
I think that's excellent. And how is the community? You said there's still people challenging 5 years into the process. And I think that's something that doesn't change. But with the pandemic on top of the wildfires, how is the community coping right now through this?
I've heard, some overwhelming response, from this project, and a lot of community members have been so supportive. And just like I mentioned, there's people that are hurting. And I think, when you see all the recent wildfires, it's a trigger for a lot. even just watching that news footage. And I really tried in this to actually kind of not focus too much on the fire and focus more on the coming back home aspect of this, just to, and mostly just to, I even remember, a couple months ago when we were around the 5-month anniversary, like all those same images that the news continues to play over and over every year is hard on the community. Like they don't like that image. We actually we started the movie actually on footage I had of leaving the community. And, based on feedback from mental health experts, we decided to take out all the real footage of the fire from the film and just focus on animation.
Oh, interesting. Okay. And yeah, I can see how that would absolutely make a difference. You keep replaying one of the most traumatic experiences they've had over and over again.
Yeah. And every year it comes out at like clockwork. And I know the news outlets are like, they're doing their part to tell the story today. And it's great. But ultimately, when I talk to the residents, I feel a lot of people are triggered by some of those images.
Yeah. And so with the pandemic and what we're experiencing now, do you feel that there were really strong lessons learned that have helped people cope better right now?
Definitely.
Yeah. Go.
I think that I always go back to the shared experience at the start of just my community. And now we all have that, everyone is feeling some sort of, I feel like mental health, strain, or, understands trauma better, or, just everything going on in New York and everything. It reminded me even just of our community back when, COVID was going on. It's just, I think just shared experience around trauma. It opens the door for us to talk about this in any aspect. And yeah, I just hope to inspire people to talk about mental health through this. And I think we have, the time is now.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And
it's really a film about community too. And, Tim, your question got me thinking that right now, workplaces, for example, they're sort of, reorientating themselves to working together again. Some have these hybrid situations, but as companies and businesses and teams come together, there's all those issues that may be prevalent for them. And I love how Michael in this movie has just throughout has woven in the importance of community, because now that message is important too, in terms of a world where people have been physically distanced from one another. Teams are not necessarily working together in the same office. So I think these conversations are important for us in our family and our workplaces, and probably more comfortable now because we've all gone through this together in our own ways.
Yeah. And the one thing I would add just super quick is those workplaces are ultimately at the end, I tried to represent them at the end of the movie. It's, you can't tell this story without industry. And when I came back, it's all the workplaces, the people that are at those companies coming out to do those fundraisers or do this, activity. And those were a lot of the videos I did. And at the end, I try and show like, a bunch of the animals kind of rebuilding and doing the homes. That's really just based off, different workplaces in the community doing different drives or, donating their time. So it's just definitely, and, we had some support recently, even just IKEA of showing, little teasers in the IKEAs. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to work with some of the companies and, talk to employees and just engage others about our story.
Absolutely. And Charmaine mentioned something, and I love how you said physical distancing, because there's still so many people out there staying social distancing, and community and our connections with people are so important, even if it is online via video or phone. Having that connection to the outside world is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And what are you seeing with companies in Fort McMurray and elsewhere about that connection as people start to reintegrate?
I know I can speak to some of the companies that I work with in different parts of Canada, and it's been so interesting to hear the different ways that companies and nonprofits and government are bringing their team together in a way where people are not physically together in the office. And one of the leaders I spoke to, one of their most treasured times in this company, because this was a company where people are coming and going, but Fridays at 10 o'clock, people always found their way to the coffee room for 15 minutes. That was their one time to get together. And when COVID happened and they weren't able to do that physically in the same place, it had huge impacts on their team. In fact, it led to communication breakdowns, increase in conflict. So the leader made Friday coffee. So initially, I think she ordered lattes or something for some of the people and had it delivered from one of the delivery services. And now everyone just brings their coffee 10 o'clock on a Friday and they get together. And, I look at that example and I think it's great that they've been able to recreate what was important to the team. I've seen numerous examples of that. And of course, as people go back to working physically together in the same office, people will go through change. And again, another change. And we know that change and transition is tough for lots of us. And one of the other leaders I talked to, I thought this was brilliant. She said, we've really focused on reminding people about what's not changing. Our company values, our priority on wellness and health and safety. And so talking about what's not changing instead of always talking about what is changing. So I'm hearing some really interesting things that companies are doing to help employees return to work and have these important conversations and gel together as a team.
What on the topic of mental health and wellness, particularly in workplaces, but communities as well, how is that conversation happening? And what have you seen as best practices that are really working for the companies that are doing it well, or the communities that are doing it well?
Yeah. Some of the examples of best practices I'm seeing is when leaders or somebody on the team is taking ownership to make sure meetings happen. I remember when the pandemic came and people were working in hybrid or completely distanced formats, some people gave up those opportunities to bring teams together. I talked to one leader and she said her team had not had a team meeting for 4 months. And that when I asked how they would meet when they were working together in the office, they met every other week. And so I thought, wow, and so as soon as she was able to start re-implementing those meetings, she saw that stress went down, communication improved. There wasn't as many balls being dropped, so to speak. They were more on target with productivity and their requirements. So I'm seeing that when people can recreate opportunities for team members to come together, to participate on shared projects, to collaborate more in the work, those things are working really well. I've also seen a lot of companies putting more, I don't know if it's interest, attention, or effort into reviewing policies around workplace wellness and workplace resilience. And that's really exciting for me because I know with this project and Michael's vision, when a company's policies and values support resilience, then it's more likely that they're actually going to have the conversations as a team.
Mm-hmm. And how do you see that working in a hybrid workplace? If that collaboration and the meeting, ideally in person, how does that happen when some people are not in person?
Yeah.
How do we keep that connection?
Yeah, virtual platforms are a great way. I mean, I even think about our own team, Michael. You and I have not seen each other for a long time, yet we communicate daily, often, every day. And we do that through platforms like Zoom. Michael deals with all the animators and the team. And, we do that by virtual platforms like Zoom. We meet with our partners. So I think you can really recreate that well when you set it up that way. And we've been working this way on the project, really from the beginning.
Yeah, I think you need, in some ways, it's the best thing that ever happened to us is this business. I think we could never have done this movie without, some of these things like Zoom and even just, all the animators are, overseas in places like, Guatemala or Argentina and the producers live in California and the actors live in California at different spots or, some people in New York and Charmaine's in Vancouver and I'm in Calgary. And how do you organize all these people and also cost, cloud services finally are affordable where we can put terabytes online. So it's like everything kind of led up to this moment, I think, in the last couple of years. But the one thing I do notice is you need good leaders because you don't like when you're in a big group with someone and you see them day to day, it's easy to see who the leader is because you have that shared connection. But when you are online, you don't, so you really need good people around you to make sure that kind of at least in this project, we try to make sure everyone's an expert in their area and really kind of, do their piece. So you have to have almost an extra level of trust.
Mm-hmm. And that brings me to the part of the resilience side. And a huge part of resilience is that the mindset of being able to see the positive side and take away learning opportunities and growth opportunities from your situation. So what have been the wins over the past 5 years?
We've had, so many ups and downs, but we've had so many wins. Every time we had another actor join on, that took years. We started that kind of the first actor, I think, Tom, at the end of 2017 and finished Kim Basinger in 2020. So many years slowly getting people in. So all those were wins. And every time we had a corporate sponsor come on, like Canadian Mental Health wasn't a fund contributor, but they were a support contributor. We had so many mental health experts and, the gift in kind has been incredible of helping with the resources and all the services. And, same with Red Cross, working with Red Cross, who I originally worked with. And a lot of that collaboration is all come to light because of Charmaine. Charmaine has really helped me focus on the mental health piece of this movie and to approach companies that, as she mentioned earlier, that have kind of a similar mandate, because the only way we can have the conversation is if people watch this. So we need millions of views. We need, Red Cross to say that this is a tool. We need Canadian Mental Health to say this is a tool, and they have. And now we can, with their support, reach out to people and start having that conversation. But all that collaboration, it really organically came to light over several years. It wasn't fast. It's been a journey, but yeah, it happened because of Charmaine.
Thank you.
So
a team effort, I think.
Yeah.
The other win, I think, and Michael, you just kind of clued me into this right now, is just the ability to be so flexible and adaptable. You mentioned the project has grown and evolved and changed, and that's also, I think, been a real win, that we've been able to work with this team, the expanded team, which is our partners, our ambassadors, our champions, and everyone is being flexible and adaptable. And that has really helped move this project along. And I would say one of the other wins, as you described it, Tim, is just people bringing their expertise and their ideas to the table. And that's allowed this project to just take on this beautiful form and really be one that is, as Michael describes, it's a community project.
Absolutely. So when people watch the movie, what's going to be their takeaway? What are they going to walk away with in terms of perspective, skills, knowledge?
Yeah, I hope we emotionally move you. I hope we make you laugh a little bit. And I hope we remind you that, this is just a community like anyone else going through something. And ultimately, for communities that are affected by wildfires and other disasters, I hope to remind them that we're all in this together and have the conversation of mental health and in a safe spot.
Yeah. Charmaine, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I'll just add, Michael was on a panel conversation recently, and there was a conversation about mental health happening on that. And I really remembered what Jen from Canadian Red Cross said, that we're not alone. And it just reminded me about how important it is for us to know, all of us as humans, who our support system is, where we can get help, and to know that we're not alone, that it's okay to not be okay, was what Jen said. And Kevin was talking about, we're not alone. We can ask for help. We can reach out. There's supports there. And I think sometimes in life, and when people hold their own emotional experiences close to their chest, or it's uncomfortable to talk about, the conversation doesn't happen. And so that was a great reminder, I think, about just reaching out, asking for help. It's okay not to be okay.
Yeah. Well, and there's thankfully a lot of conversation about that these days. So from a corporate perspective, a lot of our listeners are corporate leaders and executives. So how can a company use this film to start the conversation around mental health and resilience?
Yeah, I think any organization or company, especially companies in Alberta and again, places that are affected by disasters, I think this is a great tool to share with them. And ultimately, this is a Canadian story. It's, I really tried to highlight, all the firefighters ever coming up and, donations and support. And I think that experience of anyone who's down or might, I know people that would often when we, now even myself, now I'm a little bit triggered myself. So I think anyone again in those areas, this is a great opportunity to share with their employees and have that conversation. And, their support resources are built into that. And yeah, it's also just a thank you message to everyone in Canada. So, any of those regions, whether you're in Edmonton, Calgary, Toronto, there's a lot of help from everyone. So I'll pass the mic to Charmaine to add on to that.
We've had conversations with different businesses, government groups, nonprofits, and they've expressed interest in doing things like a lunch and learn where they can bring their team together and watch the movie together as a team and have a conversation, whether that conversation be about their workplace or what's going on for them in their own families. What Canadian Mental Health Association is working with us to create these discussion guides. So we'll have things like a family discussion guide and a workplace discussion guide. Because one of the things we discovered with this project, and I know from working in mental health for a long time, is one of the challenges we have to overcome is knowing how to talk about it. And sometimes conversations don't happen because people are not clear on what to say. How do I talk to a colleague about, are you doing okay? Something seems different about you. So those are some of the tools that we're creating to help people start the conversation. I know when you and I first met, I don't know if you remember this, but one of the things that you talked about was that if moms and dads have these conversations, then they bring them home to the dinner table. They bring them home to the families. And that's our hope too, is that people will have these conversations in the workplace because then they bring it home and talk about it with their families. And that's where we start to see resilience build and change really happen.
Yeah. The thing I'd add is, David from Canadian Mental Health Association always says some of the best, conversations and, mental health happens over, a cup of coffee or the dinner table. Right. So and that's, what we hope to do is have those conversations.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah. Because one of the biggest barriers to moving through a lot of mental health issues is just people feel awkward having that conversation. They don't, as you said, don't know how to approach it. And I think that gets amplified in the workplace because
definitely
people feel there are extra barriers in place that's someone's personal life. I really shouldn't touch that. And that's from the corporate level as well as the coworker level.
Yeah.
So
it's totally tricky to navigate. People worry about prying too much. Where is my boundaries here? What can I ask and what can't I ask? And one of the things I think is humans, and I remember years and years ago, I used to work in the correctional system. So I was a correctional officer going back in another lifetime. But that was a system where people normally didn't come up to you and say, Tim, how are you doing? And it wasn't an environment that really talked about mental health yet. The stress level was so high. And I had an incredible leader. His name was John Bromley. And when we went through stressful situations, he would come up to us and say, how are you? And we'd usually say something like, oh, I'm doing good. And he'd say, no, that's not what I asked. How are you doing? And so just knowing how to get that conversation going and just to ask a question about how someone's doing is important. And it's also one that I learned some of us actually have to practice. We have to practice building that language into our repertoire of skills.
And I agree with you. I'd say incorporating that language from the asking standpoint, but also from the receiving standpoint, because there's that, as you said, oh, I'm doing fine. Through COVID, people would say, oh, everything's fine. Yeah. Fine is not an answer. Fine doesn't tell us what's going on. And so we have that default response. And sometimes we don't even think that we give that response. So triggering our brain into the awareness of, what are we actually responding to? Are we answering the question and being honest about our feelings? Or at least maybe if we don't want to talk to that person, are we saying, yeah, there's something there, but I'm going to talk to someone else?
Mm-hmm.
What have you seen about how people have been handling that and in a positive way.
I actually had just a real life example several days ago talking to a corporate client, and this was brilliant. The individual said, "We came to a big aha around COVID is that we just took it for granted that our employees knew our policies, knew the benefit package that they had, knew that we had an employee family assistance program. They signed the form when they start their job. And so this particular company thought that this was an opportunity for them to remind their employees that they have employee family assistance program, or that you could go to HR, or you could talk to your leader. And I think that's really important, is that when our companies and our organizations have benefits available to people to help them and or their families, that we actually remind them that those benefits are there. Because a lot of times, and I know that from when I used to do mediation and counseling with workplaces, that a lot of people, they know that that exists, but they don't know how to access it, and they're not sure who's going to find out. And so this is a great opportunity to remind people what supports are there for them.
You bring up a great point too, is, we know just from looking at the numbers that a huge percentage of employee benefits aren't utilized, particularly as we get into the more quote wellness options, the employee family assistance plans, the access to counselors and all those different resources. And even though people might be reminded that they're there, what else can companies do to help? Really, you can't mandate that they be used, but how can you encourage and make it okay for people to reach out for help?
One group I worked with a few years ago, this was pre-pandemic, but I believe it's a really good practice, is they had internal champions. I think they used a different word, but that was the feeling I got from them. Internal champions or ambassadors. So that was the word that they used. They're internal ambassadors of mental health and resilience. And these were employees, supervisors, people at all different levels in that organization who, their volunteer role in the company. So part of one of the projects they took on was just being an ambassador for the services. Another company that I talked to started writing about the different supports available in their company newsletter. They did a once a month sort of email blast to all their employees and so forth. And another company I was aware of, they actually set up their own internal, they called it their company name and their internal university, where they actually put a lot of resources. Some of those resources were links to resources from an organization like Canadian Mental Health Association, or to their own internal resources. And another one, I thought this was just exceptional. They had a weekly message that came on your voicemail from the CEO of the company. Every Monday morning at 7:00, he recorded a message and it went out onto all of the employees' voicemails. And it was just a message about taking care of yourself, or, resilience, or working together as a team. It wasn't about productivity or meeting our corporate goals. It was about the people. And I thought that was a great way. People looked forward to this message. I heard from employees that they loved Mondays. It started their week off with a reminder about how taking care of ourselves and wellness is really, really essential.
Yeah, the one thing I would add quickly to that, I think, is sometimes you got to be creative too.
Mm.
I know of a company in Vancouver, just where a bunch of my friends, they used to get together to play hockey, and COVID was taking that away after work. You have kind of, so what do you do? So they came up with the idea, let's, every once a week or every 2 weeks, we get together and they play an online game together. You can have some drinks, you can talk to your coworkers a little outside of work. Because sometimes some of those conversations happen, as Sherman's mentioned, like while you're having coffee or after, when you're staying late or whatever, that human connection. So is there a way to kind of have that, connection through something new?
Yeah. I know a lot of, COVID cocktail hour and, coffee chats and things like that, the open house things, even some companies using breakout rooms to,
Right.
people can jump into a breakout room with someone else to chat. Yeah. It's not as ideal as in person, but it's more convenient for people who aren't in the office, but also creates that connection.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, obviously, there's so many areas we could dive into from a mental health, resilience, well-being standpoint. tell me a bit more about when the movie comes out. Do you have a exact date for the release?
We don't have an exact date. We are still waiting on some of the film festival news. We're looking by kind of the first week of August, we will have those, announcements. So yeah, fingers crossed, definitely looking at, some Alberta film festivals as well as Edmonton and Calgary. And yeah, the list goes on. We've submitted to 30 and you can follow us at backhomeagainmovie.com or our same for the Instagram handle and Facebook. And we'll be releasing those announcements and a lot of interviews leading up to that time as well.
Yeah, and you had you name dropped a little bit, but there's some big names involved with this movie.
Yeah, we got some incredible actors that donated their time to this, and that's the big piece. Is this could never have come together. And we got Eugene Levy and Catherine O'Hare and Norm Macdonald and Bill Burr, and Kim Basinger, and Tom Green and Marlon Wayne, and Tantu Cardinal and Lauren Cardinal and Gordon Pinson and Ed Asner and Sherry Shepard and Howie Mandel. And I might have missed one or two, I'm sure. But yeah, it's just an incredible cast that came together to tell this story.
That is fantastic. And again, shows the power of community and people working together and collaborating towards a common goal. It's fantastic.
Oh, thanks so much.
And I'm excited to see the film when it comes out. The trailer is fantastic, and we'll post the trailer and the website link in our show notes.
Amazing.
As well as I'll throw up any other links that you want to go up there.
Incredible.
And so just you said backhomeagainmovie.com?
Yeah.
Perfect. Before we wrap up, any other things that you want to take away messages? What do you hope people walk away with from this episode with not just the movie, but what's your final tidbit of advice?
I hope we inspire people to do exactly what we did today, Tim, of just like having this conversation. I think that's the goal of this is just, to have the opportunity today to talk to you and tell us, a little bit about our journey and our story is I hope we can inspire others to do the same and maybe break down some of those walls that exist right now around mental health.
Absolutely. Charmaine?
And I would just add to what Michael said to just take a few minutes today, every day, just to do something that honors your resilience, your mental health. And that'll be different for everybody, but just consciously making that effort and taking that time.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both so much for joining me. This has been awesome. And I've really enjoyed hearing about the movie and the process and some of the tips of mental health and resilience that have come out of that. And I'm looking forward to seeing the final product in fall.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Tim, for the time today.
Thank you for listening to the Working Well podcast. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love to hear your experiences and how you've applied tips from the show to your daily life. So please keep us posted on your progress. To stay up to date with new episode releases, make sure to subscribe to our mailing list by emailing podcast@freshgroup.ca and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And once again, I'm Tim Boris with Fresh Wellness Group. We'll see you on the next episode.